You've probably heard plenty of warnings about the dangers of creepy guys on the internet, and you may have even given some of those warnings to your kids. Truth is, it's likely worse than you realize, especially when it comes to young girls working to establish their place in the influencer universe. Hey everyone, Adam Holtz here, your host of The Plugged In Show, focused on the family's weekly conversation about entertainment, pop culture, and technology. Thanks for joining us today. Well, last week, the Wall Street Journal published an article by Catherine Blunt talking in depth about the reality faced by young would-be Instagram influencers. It tells the story of one Midwestern mom who started posting some pics of her young dancer daughter and quickly realized there was an audience for those pics. If you've ever thought that some of the scarier stories about internet weirdos were overblown and exaggerated, this is the kind of story that might change your mind. Frankly, it really affected the way I think about these issues. And there's so much packed into it that we're just going to respond to what this article has to say and think through some of the obvious implications potentially for your family as well. And in our second segment, I'm going to be talking with Kingdom Story producer and director Andrew Erwin. He and his brother John have been the driving creative force behind some of Hollywood's biggest Christian films the last few years, including Unsung Hero, Jesus Revolution, Ordinary Angels, American Underdog, I Can Only Imagine, and a number of others. Well, before we dive into today's show, I want to say thanks for joining us each week as we talk about how screens and entertainment potentially influence you and your family. We love connecting with you. And if you've been blessed by the Plugged In Show, there are 3 ways you can help us bring more episodes your way in the future. First, tell your friends. It's probably the best way to promote the show. Second, leave a review wherever you get your podcast. And third, we'd invite you to make a donation to the show today via the donate link at the top of our podcast page, thepluggedinshow.com. Any and all of those ways of supporting us mean a lot to us, so thank you. All right, with no further ado, let's get started. Joining me today are Emily Chow and Jonathan McKee. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hey.
Well, I mentioned that we would be talking to Andrew Erwin in our second segment, and I thought this was a great opportunity to pitch the ultimate softball icebreaker question. What is your favorite Christian movie of all time, and why? Emily? I'm going to pick you first.
I'm going to go with just Facing the Giants because that's the one that I remember like the most nostalgia from because that was like the Christian movie, you know, growing up. Everybody knew it. Everybody had seen it. And, you know, it's the good sports story. So I'm just going to go with that one. I think it's a classic.
That's a great answer. Jonathan, what about you?
So define movie, like it was on a big screen in a theater.
This is not that hard of a question, guys. Jonathan, however you feel compelled to answer is just fine.
I went and saw in a theater The Chosen.
I will allow that.
And I'm going to go with that.
The judges will allow that.
Let's just say that I think The Chosen is so spot on and I love it. My wife and I can't get enough of it. It brings us to tears almost every episode.
Yeah.
And it was worth seeing in the theater. And I can't wait till stuff is released. I mean, we're just constantly waiting till new stuff is released. It's so cool to see the kind of between the lines. Mm-hmm. What would this conversation look like? Something that was 2 sentences in the Bible of, and he turned to his disciples and this and walked away. And you're like, yeah, but what did that conversation look like? And just kind of seeing what maybe it did. I really feel like it captures the heart of Jesus. And so I don't know, good stuff.
Jonathan, I could not agree more. And one of the privileges of being at Plugged In is that we have gotten to talk to a lot of the people involved with The Chosen over the years. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago on episode 238, we talked with the actors who played John and Judas.
Yeah,
so if you missed that episode, I would commend that interview to your attention. You can go back and check that out. And of course, you can find that at thepluggedinshow.com or wherever you get your podcasts. So for me, I think I've mentioned this before, but my daughters absolutely adore Soul Surfer, which came out all the way back in 2011 and actually was sort of the first faith-oriented movie that Dennis Quaid was in, and it sort of started a late career renaissance for him. If you're not familiar with it, it's the story of Bethany Hamilton, who was really rising in the surfing world at that point, and she had a horrible encounter with a shark that took her left arm. And it's a remarkable sports story, and I like the way they integrate faith in a very realistic way. Faith is not necessarily an immediate panacea for this horrible thing that has happened, but we see how it plays an important role in her life and her family's life. So that would be the movie that gets my vote. And if you're listening to the Plugged In Show today, how about you? What would you say your favorite Christian movie is and why? You can let us know at team@thepluggedinshow.com. Well, every now and then, I run across an article online that just begs to be read because the headline stops you cold. And yeah, obviously there's all sorts of clickbait out there trying to draw us in. But last week, someone actually sent me an article from the Wall Street Journal, and it's got a title that almost feels like a horror movie. The influencer is a young teenage girl. The audience is 92% men. And I mean, from the get-go, I'm like, man, I got to dive into this and find out what this article is all about. And occasionally on the Plugged In Show, we like to respond to an important article that we've seen, and this one definitely qualifies. What I think it does so well is helping us move from the somewhat abstract threat of predators and pedophiles lurking out there to a real sense of how broad that threat is and how one family has really navigated that. And the purpose in talking about it isn't to scare you. This isn't to make us think, oh man, it's so much worse than I thought, even though I think that may be one of the outcomes here, but to deepen our understanding of what really is going on when we talk about influencers, and especially young female influencers, and the people who are most interested in them in the social media realm. So let's just dig into this. I've asked both of you to read this article, and we're going to unpack it together. The core narrative revolves around a mom and a daughter. How does Catherine Blunt tell this unnamed Midwestern family's story, and what is their story? What have they experienced together?
I think that, basically the whole story is that the mom decided to start an Instagram account for her tween daughter, who was a dancer, to showcase the daughter's dancing abilities and such.
It's totally innocent at this point.
It was. And the mom was completely managing the account. But the account grew in popularity very, very quickly. It said that, within a month, brands were asking if they could send her dance wear.
So in a month, they're being rewarded.
Yeah, within a month. Mm-hmm. And basically what started happening was these adult men started commenting on the posts. And, at first the mom was like, okay, you know what? We're not even going to go there. So she was blocking them. She was deleting them. And she was reporting them. She was doing all the things you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. But it just kept coming because, you can delete it. Even if Instagram deletes an account, all you have to do is create a new account, Right. So it wasn't really doing much good. And it got to a point where she realized, she'd been talking to her daughter about it, and her daughter's like, I really enjoy making the content. Her daughter was considering, I want to potentially make this a real career. I want to be an influencer when I grow up. And so, the mom knew enough to be like, okay, so I can help protect her from some of the worst of this. But the reality is, if my daughter wants to be successful, she needs engagement. If I am deleting the engagement, then she's never going to be successful. So basically she had a choice. Well, I can let her continue and I just have to open the floodgates and let all the creeps in, or we just need to shut it down and never touch it again. And they went with choice A. They decided to open the floodgates. And it basically, it sounds like it's been a real roller coaster for them. Eventually, their account actually got deleted because they had violated community guidelines.
By Instagram.
Somehow. Yeah, by Instagram. And they were kind of like, wait, what community guidelines did we violate? They don't even know what they did wrong. And, Meta, Instagram's parent company, isn't giving them the information that they're asking for. So they're like, okay, so they went to their backup account, and then that one got deleted a few months later. And so, who knows why it got deleted. According to the mom, she says, I don't think I violated any community standards or guidelines, but, it makes me wonder, or was it deleted because of all the creepy things that guys were saying on the account? Because that in and of itself, is a community guideline. But yeah, basically the whole story, though, is just that the only way for this young girl to have a market on Instagram was to just embrace the fact that in this case, it was 92% of her audience was going to be adult men.
Jonathan, I know that this is a topic that you have written and talked about a great deal. And even as I was reading this, I kept thinking, oh man, I can't wait to hear what Jonathan has to say about this article. And there are so many quotes, and I'm going to pull a few out a little bit later in our conversation. I mean, just these quotes from the mom and the reporter, who I think did a really great job of just telling the story pretty, journalistically. But Jonathan, what really stood out to you as you read this article?
Yeah, on one hand, I was really glad that this mom decided to share this story kind of, in a vulnerable fashion, kind of admitting some of the things that creeped her out and stuff, because this is all too real. This stuff happens. I think there's so many different directions to go with this. One of the things I just think that is glaring is the fact that, right now legislation is really working on trying to raise the age to where kids have to be even older before they can have their own social media accounts. It's like they're realizing young kids are having to make adult decisions, and maybe 13 is a little too young. So one of the glaring things about this article is that, they're saying, hey, kids under 13 aren't supposed to do this, but they talk about the caveat that they're allowed to basically have these accounts as long as mom is willing to administer it. And that's exactly an example of what this is a mom administering it and making, just like Emily said, mom's making the choice of, we're going to go ahead and let this slide because that's what it takes to become a celebrity these days.
Well, to a certain degree, I actually just want to unpack that part for a minute.
Definitely.
It's kind of exploitive in a way. And, you're sitting there and you're like, what kind of parent would let their child do that? And so I want to approach this from both angles.
Yep.
Because, so I'm going to play devil's advocate first here, and then you can come back at me with the other side. But I want to just say, I actually really feel for this mom because she's sitting there and she's trying to protect her daughter, but, she's also, trying to find a way where her daughter can use this to earn money for college. And it even says in the article, her daughter has already raised $20,000 for college and to get a car when she's old enough to drive. And I'm like, that's really impressive. Like, you're not going to make that kind of money, flipping burgers. And, the main thing, the girl also says this in the article, her main thing is not her Instagram account. It's actually her grades. She's a straight A student. So, this is a person who is very responsible. The daughter personally said, I never make any posts that shows me in a swimsuit or anything like that. I always make sure my content is really clean and classy and everything. And so it's not like they are doing these awful things to draw attention to the daughter.
Right.
It's just the nature of the internet. And, that's why I want to play devil's advocate here, is because I'm looking at all this and, Meta deleted their accounts for these violations and stuff. And I'm like, okay, I feel like Meta's not doing enough to address the problem at the source. And the source isn't the fact that this mom has created an account to showcase her daughter's dancing ability. The problem is that we are allowing people to create these accounts and then follow teen girls.
Right. Well, and that was one of the things that really stood out to me in the article. And I want to read just a couple of paragraphs. It'll take me a second to get through it. But I think when we talk about the algorithm, again, it's a weird word, right?
Yes.
It's kind of abstract and it can just sort of float out there. But I think this article does a terrific job of unpacking exactly how the algorithm works. I just want to read this segment. Instagram makes it easy for strangers to find photos of children, and its algorithm is built to identify users' interests and push similar content. Investigations by the Wall Street Journal and outside researchers have found that upon recognizing that an account might be sexually interested in children, Instagram's algorithm recommends child accounts for the user to follow, as well as sexual content related to both children and adults. The algorithm has become the engine powering the growth of an insidious world in which young girls' online popularity is perversely predicated on gaining large numbers of male followers. And those two paragraphs just made my blood run cold.
I know, right? It makes you angry.
Yeah.
Because you're just like, why are they making the algorithm that way? And that's what I'm saying. I don't think Instagram is doing enough to stop the problem.
Yep.
And because they're not going to turn off their algorithm or change it, because that's how they make money.
Right.
And it's anything in the name of the almighty dollar.
Well, and this isn't just unique to Instagram. TikTok was called the pedophile's playground, a few years ago because of that very thing. What happened is you'd have, an example I always give actually in my parent workshops is you have a site of a little girl who likes to dance. And what happens is, somebody, a young influencer who, likes to dance, all of a sudden starts getting followers for that. But let's talk about it from the follower's perspective. If you're some guy who happens to look at a video of a young girl dancing and you like it, or you even pause on it for long enough to watch it, it picks up that you like that, or you pause long enough to watch it, and it feeds you more of that. So before you know it, you're getting fed a lot of little girls dancing. So that's why they call it a pedophile's playground, because if you happen to like a certain type of kind of creepy content, you'll get fed more of that content. And you think, as smart as AI is, that we should be able to pick up on, hey, here's a dude who, according to his profile, says he's this age and this and that, or here's the picture,
flags,
blah, blah,
red flags.
And all he's looking at is little, 8-year-olds dancing,
Right.
Maybe could our AI be that smart?
Yep. Well, and you were talking about playing devil's advocate. I want to actually just give voice to the other side of the equation here. The mom says, if you want to be an influencer and work with brands and get paid, and I think that's important, you have to work with the algorithm, and it all works with how many people like and engage your post. You have to accept it. And I think that's, for me, that's the bottom line in this article is, as parents, are we willing to trade images of primarily our daughters most of the time for the attention of grown men who, by their own admission, are not trying to pretend to be anything other than what they are, which is sexually interested in it. And one of the other things the article talked about was there is an encrypted messaging app called Telegram. And it basically is a place where people can be out in the open about their fetishes and about their attraction to young girls. And so it's sort of like, a DM network for pedophiles, if I can put it that way.
It's one of many. But it's one of many. It's a messaging app.
It's a messaging app.
It's just the fact that it's encrypted, so you can't, trace back to the original sender. So, the government can't intervene at any point.
And the article says that if you have more than 1,000 followers, it's guaranteed that your images are on this messaging app. And again,
that's what the mom said.
This is, that's what, it's mentioned in the article.
But it's a pretty good assumption.
So again, as a parent, are you willing to make that trade? Are you willing to make the $20,000 trade-off for men doing things with the images that we don't want to think about,
Well, and beyond that, even, yes, obviously these people are taking things to another app, and, you can't really stop that from happening. But even on Instagram itself, it says right here, some men sent direct messages proclaiming their obsessions with the girl.
Yep.
Others sent pictures of male genitalia and links to porn sites. And this is the guys directly trying to communicate with what they think is a teenage girl. So you're not just potentially sending those photos out into the internet to be manipulated. You have it right there within the app.
Well, and let's talk about DMs for a second. DMs is one of those kind of very dangerous areas of this because, again, you've got these anonymous people being able to send these messages. And some of the safety changes TikTok has made in the last few years was DMs, and it's because of the pressure from parents, legislators, that kind of stuff, because they used to have DMs automatically turned on when a young person started their TikTok profile. Now they have it set, they literally raise the age to where
you can't have them till you're 16.
Where you can receive, to get DMs. And the reason, and I always ask parents, I say, hey, parents, as you're asking yourself, what age is my kid responsible enough to start handling this stuff? Ask yourself, if TikTok themselves, who want as much interaction and as much of this stuff going on as possible, if they raise the age to 16 before you could send and receive DMs, what's that tell you about DMs?
Right.
What's that? And it's one of those things where we can think about it because that's where a lot of, this inappropriate talk is sent. I, at school assemblies, always talk to young girls, especially about this. And I think the more fascinating conversation is when I sit in a principal's office. Yes, when I was a kid, I was always in the principal's office, and now I'm still in the principal's office. But I go in and I sit in the principal's office before I go speak, and very often he'll start asking me questions like, man, I'm dealing with this, we had this happen, we had this. And I kind of want to see the principal's comfort level for what I'm about to say, because I'm very candid up front and I'm very blunt with some of the things I say. So I will usually say, hey, and I usually pull up some kids from this principal's school, and I pull up their accounts right there. And when you click around and you start doing it, you can start seeing all the friends, and before you know it, you're tapped into a bunch of the different people at their school. And I would literally pull up somebody right there, and I would start scrolling. I'll say, let me show you exactly what a predator would do. It sounds really creepy. And we would pull up and we'd start clicking around, and all of a sudden we'd find a young girl, we'd click around. Before you know it, within like 60 to 90 seconds, you'd find posts of some girl at the lake with her friends in bikinis, whatever. And I said, let's look at the comments that people are making. And immediately you saw all these comments, some of them very inappropriate, but some of them just kind of creepy, like looking good, and it wasn't like from their friend. It was from some anonymous. But then you also saw this, hey, have you thought about modeling? Call us.
Right.
So I would take screenshots of that. I'd send it to my friend at LAPD's ICAC, and I'd be like, hey, what do you think? Is this legit? I would sometimes do this while sitting in the principal's office. I'd get a text back. Completely not legit. Why do you think, that a modeling agency is randomly hitting this girl's account, in nowhere, Nebraska? I'm not dissing on Nebraska here, but, there was...
Thank you for not picking on Iowa. I appreciate that.
Yeah. The middle of nowhere, small town, and all of a sudden this modeling agency is saying, yes, send us your stuff. She goes, there's a 9% chance that is not a modeling agency.
Well, they bring that up in the article. So they brought it up because, they were quoting something from a Telegram screenshot where one of the creeps, one of the guys was like, oh yeah, we're all, quote, modeling agents. Like he was making fun of the fact that people don't realize that they're not obviously modeling agencies and such.
And this, with this example, you had a mom that, to her credit, was working aggressively to weed all of this out. If you've made this deal with, the devil, metaphorically speaking, and you're not on top of this, the article also talks about how you get sextortion threats. You get people blackmailing you, saying, we have nude pictures of you. Even if you don't have them, if you're a young girl, it spirals into a black hole pretty quickly. And I think the thing that was eye-opening to me about this article is, okay, yeah, we know there are bad people out there and there might be a weirdo or two. What was staggering to me was this mom could tell that 92% of her daughter's followers were adult men, right? And so, okay, we're not talking about a fringe or a one-off, maybe a guy here, a guy there. We're talking about massive numbers of people following children's accounts because of their sexual attraction to children.
I think it said that she had something like 100,000 followers at one point. So 92%, that's 92,000 adult men creeping on this child's account because she is a child.
Yeah. And I think the inflection point, I want to go back to the beginning of the story. Mom starts posting her adorable daughter's dancing pics, right?
Yeah.
It's just, I just want to share what my daughter's doing. And it gets really dark really fast. And so I think, to me, as much as we would like to say, oh, social media can be a place to have fun and encouraging conversations about our kids' interests, it's not. I mean, we need to just sort of lance that naivete and say, I'm sorry this is not the place for it because it gets really dark really fast.
The minute you set your account to be public, the minute you set your child's account to be public in any way, shape, or form, you have just opened the floodgates. Like, you have lost control. You will never have control again once you do that. So what you just said, sharing pictures of your child online, there's a term for that. It's called sharenting.
Right.
And if you're a grandparent who does it, it's called grand-sharenting. So just some, just some terms to throw out for you guys in case you've heard of them but not known what they are. Like, you as the adult, you're like, oh, it's fine for me to have a public account. I'm an adult. My child will have the private account. But the minute you start sharing pictures, well, you just shared your child.
Right.
Well, I understand the temptation. I mean, my grandson, he's 3. He is so stinking cute.
Right.
And he does the funniest things. And so we have just a family chat, and there's like, a dozen of us slammed into literally just a text chain. And we text all the time. Oh my gosh, look at him at his swimming lesson. Oh my gosh, look at this. He said this. And it's hilarious. And there's parts of you that almost thinks, man, this could go so viral. I mean, this was so funny. This is way funnier than a lot of stuff I saw in there. So I understand the temptation, but folks, I mean, this is, and I don't even want to refer to the article because I don't want there to be any judgment. That's a tough situation. Who knows how she got there? And God bless her. I hope she works it all out. But as for our listeners here who are sitting here and thinking about this and considering this is, an article like this helps us kind of realize, as a full-grown adult with some life experience, this is tough. Now, think about what we do when we hand our 10-year-old a device and they start navigating this on their own. You've got 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, heck, 14-year-olds who actually can be on these sites without having to lie about their age, because the 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds are lying about their age, and they're out there and they're trying to navigate this world. I mean, these are the stories that every single town I go to and speak at, parents come up to me crying at the end of my workshop and tell me the personal stories of how they, went in their daughter's room and their daughter was asleep and they pick up the phone and there was this text trail and they scroll down and those inappropriate pictures, those are what are sent to young girls. And this happens all the time. And especially when young girls are navigating this by themselves because they don't even have a protector. As parents, we need to think about 2 things. We need to think about the bonding time and the boundary time that we can have when it comes to this. And when it comes to bonding, we need to start having conversations about this. An article like this would be a great one to read with our kids and start that dialogue, start talking about it. As for boundaries, I'll tell you what, delaying that age in which our kids get devices, keeping phones out of the bedroom, these are the kind of things that we as parents can do more than starting to manage them and become, what's that telling them?
Right.
We've got to be very careful.
I think just in terms of landing the plane and everything, I think there's a couple of takeaways here. Going off of what you just said, Jonathan, I absolutely delay giving them social media, delay giving them devices, period, but especially social media. When you do give them social media, you need to be in this isn't a one-time conversation. It's constant conversation. And maybe to start them off, you need to enable those parental controls on their social media accounts. If you go to Plugged In, we've already got the tutorial for TikTok is up. Instagram is coming very, very soon. So just keep your eyes peeled for that. And we're going to be uploading as many tutorials as we can for all these different social media sites so that you as the parent, it gives you a sense of like moderation of like, hey, let's start slow and let's introduce you to this world slowly so that you can build those muscles, of dealing with social media. And you know what? It may turn out that you don't actually enjoy social media that much, but there are tools in place that can at least help you as a parent to guide them into this world instead of just being like, okay, here's the device. Good luck. And
Emily, another good takeaway from this is if we are considering, letting our young people be influencers, or if we're considering managing, our children like this, I just think, go back to the example of if your young girl is a dancer, if your daughter is a dancer, would you, host a dance recital for her where you looked out in the audience and 92% were men and they were yelling things on the stage like some of the comments made in this article? Yeah. Would you then say, well, you know what? That's just kind of what comes along with the path. That's just the way it is. And would you let it happen? Or would you grab her off the stage and rush her to the car and get out of there. And see, that's the difference. A lot of people feel that they're separated from this. That's just the nature of the internet. So let's let it go. And the fact is that sadly, the internet is a stepping stone to some of these men actually trying to make contact, trying to say, meet me in the Walmart parking lot. And this is where the stories get really dark.
So this is what I think about what you just said. We've always been exposed to this through, beauty pageants, magazines, whatnot. The difference, though, is that if people are like, this is just the nature of the internet. Yeah, it's the nature of the internet, but you were never even exposed to this as a child. Growing up, you did not have strangers commenting on pictures of you that in your family photo album.
When you were 10.
When you were 10. You were not exposed to that. You don't even have the muscles for this. And you think that your child will because they grew up in the digital age. That is just not, that's not how it is. No, we're exposing them to stuff that they don't have the skill set to manage, that they don't have the emotions to, kids can't even express their emotions about how this makes them feel, because this is unheard of territory. And we've never had this level of exposure to the creeps ever in the world. They've always been there, but we've never had direct contact with them.
So many things that I want to add, but I'm going to rein it in at this point. This has been a conversation that has exceeded my expectations. I knew there was going to be a lot that we could talk about here, and I hope that we have unpacked that in a way that maybe has given you a fresh understanding or a deeper understanding of how real some of these threats are. And it challenged my naivete on some things, and maybe it has for you too. And if you're interested in learning more, we'll put a link to this article from the Wall Street Journal in the episode notes for today's show. And this is the sort of thing that we want to keep doing on the Plugged In Show, is just talking about the cultural influences through technology and entertainment that are shaping our kids as they grow up today. I hope that you have been engaged by our conversation and really, again, deepened your sense of what the real threat is here. So thanks, guys, for this talk today.
Yep.
Well, as I mentioned in the introduction for this week's show, today we've got a conversation I've really been looking forward to. I'm talking with Andy Erwin, who, along with his brother John, has helped to bring us movies like Jesus Revolution, I Can Only Imagine, The Jesus Music, American Underdog, I Still Believe in Woodlong, among many others. We've talked with Andy before, and it's great to have you back on the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Adam, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for having me on.
Well, you have a new thing, even newer than some of the movies we've been talking about. It is called Storytellers, and it's a podcast. So let's start there. I want to hear what the inspiration was for this podcast and what people can expect to find when they join you for it.
Adam, the cool thing is that, like yourself, I grew up around talk radio. My dad was in talk radio growing up. And so I always sitting by the engineer and doing my baseball cards growing up while he was doing a show. And, when we got to this point in our career, we were talking with our team, and they said, well, you guys have done a great job of focusing on making really good movies, but you haven't had a conversation with the audience as much as you need to. And I was like, what would be one way I could do that? They're like, start a podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I'm not super interesting. I was like, but I've got a lot of cool friends. And I said, what if we started a podcast that focused on storytellers? And we just let people kind of behind closed doors with kind of the kind of conversations we would have at a coffee shop with some of our peers.
Yeah.
And so I just started inviting my friends by text and said, hey, would you be in if I did this? And the first 30 episodes of this season 1 filled up within about 10 days.
Wow.
And so, our first episodes with Dennis Quaid, and then we've got Candace Cameron Bure, we've had Patricia Heaton. So it's just been fascinating to kind of go through a lot of the people we've worked with or been peers with, and to let people have this common experience of understanding the journey of these storytellers.
Yeah, I listened to a good portion of the one with Dennis Quaid. I watched some of the one with Candace Cameron Bure, and, both watching and listening. I watched them on YouTube.
Yeah.
I had this sort of aha moment that you're going to laugh at, but I suspect is kind of part of the point. I'm like, oh, they're just real people, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that we relate to them in terms of the kind of characters they play. And, you know, somebody like Dennis Quaid's been around our entire existence. I mean, I was watching Herbie the Love Bug movies in 1970 with Dennis Quaid in them, right?
Yeah.
But just to see you have that sort of coffee shop-esque conversation, I really like that, because I think that we want to see, who are these people really? And the one with Candace Cameron Bure it was just a lovely conversation.
Yeah. You know, I think a lot of times in this celebrity driven culture, we turn people into icons, and we feel like there's somehow superheroes that never have a moment of self doubt, and they just have reached this pinnacle of success. And it's just not true. And so a lot of these people, because we've been friends for so long, they trust me, and I just allow them to be regular people. So with Candace, just being candid about, you know, how does she navigate when she gets public criticism,
right? And she has taken stands and taken enormous heat.
Yeah, and I talk about this on the show with her, because I don't really desire to get into anything that causes more controversy in her life. So I just like, let's sidestep any issues and let's just talk about how you respond to them.
Yeah.
And I was like, for somebody that is so innocent like a dove, like Candace Cameron, like she's the sweetest person on the planet, when she steps in a moment where she gets intense backlash or controversy or like criticism over something that is completely misunderstood or well-meaning, how does she handle that? And she just talked about finding her value in who she is, not what people think that she is.
Yeah.
And she really got very, very candid with us. And it was just, for me, it was super encouraging. And there was a lot of courage in how she represented herself. And so I'm excited, you know, for people to be able to get a glimpse of some of our friends that we only usually get behind closed doors, and they really go to some really cool places. And then moments of inspiration that I didn't expect, where I just finding out these iconic stories, like talking with Randall Wallace that wrote Braveheart, where that story came from and where did he find this moment. And he just said that he was at a moment where he had just lost his job, and he had been researching this story about a distant relative, William Wallace. And when he lost his job, he said he broke down and he got down on his hands and knees and he was praying. And he was like, God, I don't want to have a massive breakdown in front of my kids like my father had when he lost his job. He's like, but if this is what it takes for my young men to become men, and the best thing in the world for them is to grow up in a 2-room house with no running water in Tennessee like I did, he's like, then bring it on. But if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down with my sword swinging and not bending my knee to Hollywood, and doing a story that really matters. And so he said, I went in the next room and I started writing Braveheart. And that's where the whole line of they can take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom came from. And I was like, oh my gosh,
wow.
That. And so you realize that these are just people that are in the same struggle we all are, that stumble into incredible stories.
I love that. Well, I want to pivot and just ask a little bit broader question. You guys have had amazing success, and you were actually here at Focus about 10 years ago, you and John. It was right before Woodlawn came out. And I remember being in a room where you guys were outlining your vision for how faith-infused films, I'm intentionally not calling them Christian movies, because I think your understanding of what that is not the way we normally use that phrase, right? But you had a vision for making blockbusters to really influence culture. And since then, I feel like it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And my question is, what would you say you have learned in the last decade about telling faith stories, not necessarily just to an evangelical or a Christian audience, but to the broader mainstream marketplace?
Yeah, Adam, I think, you know, every reason behind why we tell the stories that we tell is because at the basis of it all is, you know, there's an eternal kingdom mindset. That's why we decided to name our company Kingdom Story Company. It's the idea of God's eternal kingdom. And so everything that we do is intentional and strategic in order to get the gospel out and to plant seeds. And the Bible says that some are called to plant, some are called to water, some are called to harvest. And we just feel like we're seed planters. But we have tried a strategic method of, over the years since Woodlawn, of trying to find a way to reach what we call the benevolent skeptic. It's somebody that they're not hostile towards Christianity. They just don't know they need it yet.
Wow.
And they're the people right outside the church doors. And when my brother does a movie like Jesus Revolution, or when we release a movie even recently like Ordinary Angels, the desire is at times to be overt and at times to be subversive, but to kind of become all things to all people in order that we may win some. And so we try to, it doesn't have to be a one size fits all cookie cutter kind of story. It has to be an honest story that's entertaining. It's worth the price of admission, but it earns its moment, that when you want to preach, it turns it on without the audience know it's been turned on. And so in a movie like I Can Only Imagine, where, we've earned that right, and then they get to that moment where the breakfast table with Dennis Quaid playing the father, and he says, if God can forgive everybody else, why can't he forgive me? And that moment that's honest between him and his son wrestling with it and say, God can forgive you, I can't. And he wrestles with it, walks out the door, and then comes back and decides to forgive his dad. That's an earned moment that preaches. But the audience watched it. They had so been invested in that moment, they just went with it. And so we're just trying to use different techniques, and then to see the resources that God's allowed us to tap into with the actors that have been a part of this journey. That was something we always dreamed of. We never thought it was possible.
Yeah.
But God's just opening doors, and it's a good time to tell stories of faith.
Well, and let me just finish with this question and build on that. It seems like, even though we sometimes see headlines like, oh, Christians are blacklisted in Hollywood, or, we see things that reflect the polarized nature of our culture. Yeah. And yet you guys continue to attract some of those big names. Like, I was surprised that Hilary Swank was involved with Ordinary Angels. Yeah. I don't know anything about her or her story, but do you sense that there is an openness from A-list actors and actresses to participate in the kinds of things you're doing? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, you'll get me on my soapbox here, but like my stump speech is the fact that I think as Christians, we get really comfortable sometimes in that victim chair of saying we've been kicked out from the table of culture, and especially when it comes to the arts or film, and we're not invited to the table. And I'm here to say we didn't get kicked out; we gave up our seat. So you look at the history of the arts for 2,000 years, Christianity led the way. You look at the Renaissance and every painting across Europe. You look at the history of the printing press, and the first thing being printed was the Gutenberg Bible. You look at the radio and the evangelists that have used that over the years, and television with Billy Graham. I think, Christianity led even film up until the 1960s. And even the MPAA that rated films was a Catholic organization called what was it called? It was called like the League of Decency or something like that.
Yep.
Legion of Decency. And then somewhere in the 1960s, the church gave up their seat and said, you know what, we don't need to be involved in film, movie theaters are evil. And so for 4 decades, we atrophied. And so when we all of a sudden see Mel Gibson come back and do The Passion of the Christ, a bunch of us Christians that were all around the fringes at the time were like, oh, we want to do that. But all of us looked at each other like, do you know how to make movies? No. And so I think what we've realized is Hollywood is a business.
Yeah.
And they will have their soapboxes of what they believe. And there are subversive agendas that are not friendly to what we believe.
Right.
But the controlling interest of Hollywood as a whole is money.
Yeah.
And if you prove that people will buy tickets for your movie, they will let you put whatever you want to in it. And
you guys have proven that working with Lionsgate.
Yeah. And Lionsgate is one of the studios that caught a vision for that after I Can Only Imagine, and have invested millions and millions of dollars into making our films legitimate. And so the part of the reason we're getting the Hilary Swanks and all that of the world is because we've got a studio that is unapologetically embracing our audience. And that's exciting.
That is exciting. And unfortunately, we are out of time to talk today, but I always enjoy talking with you, Andy, just getting that sort of behind the scenes glimpse. And you guys are storytellers too. So certainly wish you the best with your new podcast, Storytellers, and people can Google that or go onto YouTube and find it. And the conversations are terrific. And thanks for having a great one with us today.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you, my friend.
Well, now it's time for a segment of our show we call Pop Culture Connection, wherein we are joined by our awesome producer, Ashley. Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Adam.
For a series of questions. And Ashley asks us questions related to pop culture and technology, and our job is to give as many answers as possible. So, Ashley, take it away.
All right, Emily, I've got you up first.
All right, let's do this.
All right. Would you rather team up with Wonder Woman or Captain Marvel, and why?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think I'm going to go with Wonder Woman, even though I'm a Marvel, fan. Because I don't really like Captain Marvel. I kind of just want to go down and say all the reasons why I don't like Captain Marvel. No, I would go with Wonder Woman, though. I think that, she's got her lasso of truth. I really appreciate the way she was brought up, like just to be a warrior. Mm-hmm. I think that... Yeah, see, I'm not very good at this.
That's okay. No, you got 3 points.
She has an invisible plane.
Yeah, there's
at least
that.
sometimes.
Yeah.
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 I mean, what's
got
not
a lot-
to...
And
I
those
can't
cool
even.
bracelets.
She got the bracelets.
It's funny. I think you chose 2 superheroes who I actually don't know that much about.
Right? Well, and I would have
okay.
said, which Captain Marvel are we talking about? Because there are 3 or 4 of them.
See, I didn't
Wow.
know that.
Yes.
Well, actually, maybe I knew that, but yeah. See my point? I don't know very much about
It's all
those
Anyway.
two, but it's all good.
good.
Wonder Woman.
We digress.
All right. Adam,
Yes.
would you rather speak every language in the world or be able to talk to animals, and why?
Oh, definitely talk to animals because, what do cats think? What do dogs think? If you were out walking and you happen to see a llama, would you say, why do you spit so much? If you ran into a giraffe, you would say, do you ever get tired of having a tall neck? If you ran into a turtle, you would say, is it fun to put your head inside your shell? If you're a platypus, you could say, what does it feel like to be one of the only mammals that lays eggs? I just think we could talk about marsupials and their unique qualities.
Indeed.
Okay.
This is my favorite question that you have ever asked me.
I
nice.
think that is my favorite answer I've ever
Yes.
received from Adam.
I felt really good about
awesome.
How many points?
9 points.
I felt
Very
good about
good.
You
that.
had such a great variety of animals,
Yeah.
too. Like
Well, I-
platypus? Oh, my goodness.
I love animals.
Yeah.
Peregrine falcons. What does it feel like to dive at 185 miles an hour?
Oh,
I love
This has been
to
fun
And
facts
cheetahs.
about
We
animals.
could do an entire podcast
see
with the
what
cheetahs.
animals do.
I'm still stuck on going out for a walk and seeing a llama. I'm all for that.
I used to see a llama every day
So
in my old house.
I know we're long, but a while back I was downtown here in Colorado Springs. My son and I were out, and this woman walks by, and I literally turned to my son and said, "Are you seeing this?" And she had an emu on a leash with a little harness,
yes.
walking down the street with an emu that was as tall as she was. And apparently this is a thing. And the emu and the woman who owns her live in Manitou Springs,
Yeah.
which is sort of a suburb of Colorado Springs. But it was shocking and amazing, and everybody was taking
And
pictures.
I think that emu recently went missing and was found.
No way.
Yes. His name is
Escape.
Dennis.
Are you kidding me?
Dennis the emu. No.
I hope
Was
that
the
you're
emu
telling the
wearing a
truth.
I'm
service
telling you the truth.
vest?
Hey,
And
Adam is
some-
Look
so
it up.
happy
And
right
somewhere
now.
there's a Liberty Mutual person following along too. Anyway, let's get to Jonathan.
All right.
Was the emu
Jonathan.
wearing a sweater?
No, but the emu had a harness on. It was
funny.
It was insane.
A service harness. It was a comfort
It was
Oh
a
my
emu.
service.
goodness.
It was a comfort and service emu. Yeah.
All right, Jonathan.
Yes.
Would you rather live in a smart home with every convenience or a vintage home with no tech at all, and why?
I would definitely live in a vintage home with no tech at all because I would want to just go back to the 80s where I could just read books and just talk with my wife and lay by the pool because it would definitely have a pool or just take a bath, sadly, I would have to open up the windows, though, to let the air in because maybe it wouldn't even have any air conditioning, but that's okay. And I could have quilts that my grandma made. I could have Afghans. I could knit. I could crochet. I could cook stuff on an old gas stove. I could, mop the floors with my old string mop
Okay, you
because
know what,
I don't have any
Jonathan? I
convenience.
think you won when you mentioned knitting and crocheting.
No,
because
you
those
had
are my hobbies.
no, you had me at Afghan, which is my favorite word in English because it can be a blanket, it can be a dog, or it could be somebody who lives in the Middle East.
Indeed. All
So-
right. 12 points, Jonathan. Good job.
Yeah,
Good
that's it.
job.
You know,
Absolutely.
I knew
And
you
I
were
was
going to
actually
beat
telling
me.
the truth.
I knew you were going to beat me. Well, thank you for joining our conversation today. We have dealt with some deep stuff. We have heard from a Hollywood insider, and we've had a pretty good laugh here playing Pop Culture Connections. So a little bit of everything today. What did you think of our show? Was there anything that stood out? We would love to hear from you, and you can do that in a couple different ways. As I mentioned earlier in the show, you can just shoot us an email at team@thepluggedinshow.com. And if you go to thepluggedinshow.com, you will find a tab where you can actually leave us a voicemail on anything related to today's show. And we would love to hear from you. We may even use that voice clip on a future episode. And if you haven't done so yet, we would love it if you picked up a copy of our Plugged In team's new book, Becoming a Screen Savvy Family. In fact, we'll make it super easy for you. Today, for a gift of any amount, we will send you a copy of that book. It's practical, it's concrete. We share a lot of stories. We want to be a resource to help you navigate this crazy time we're living in terms of pop culture and technology. And we think that Becoming a Screen Savvy Family will help you do that. And you'll find information in the episode notes for today's show on how to get the book. Well, thanks again for spending some time with us. We know you have more options every single week on what you can do with your time. We like spending it with you, and we would love to invite you back next week for another episode of The Plugged In Show.
Your kids are unique, and so are you. You have your strengths as a parent and areas of growth, too. Find out what they are by taking the 7 Traits of Effective Parenting assessment from Focus on the Family. Find out how you're doing on traits like gratitude, grace, and other research-backed traits. When you're done, we'll give you a detailed PDF with several pages of content on how to use your unique strengths and how to work on your areas of growth. This simple framework shows you how to be an effective mom or dad in daily family life, a parent who recognizes your imperfections and finds ways to thrive. You'll also get access to other resources from Focus on the Family to help you keep growing into the best parent for your kids. It only takes a few minutes to boost your parenting. Take the 7 Traits of Effective Parenting assessment at parentingtraits.com. That's parentingtraits.com.